Good morning, colleagues. It's good to have you here, and thank you so much for the welcome, Francisco. This morning's topic on sustainable development goals, I'll be sharing with you and how we can ensure and help the sustainable development goals being reached. I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction as to where it started and how it affects us and how we can add value to the Sustainable Development Goal program. So by the turn of the century, the world leaders realized that their aims to reduce poverty and achieve an enhanced standard of living could not be met. So in the year 2000, the United General Assembly adopted the Millennium Declaration. Now, this declaration endorsed a set of 8 goals known as the Millennium Development Goals, or MDGs. These efforts were focused on developing countries and implied that developed countries did not require improving, which is in essence so untrue, because all countries would need to ensure that there's a sustainable way of living, because we've noticed that if you look at our environment with the type of issues we're facing, global warming, rising waters, and so on, we need to do something about it. So the next challenge was to make the development sustainable for both developed and developing countries. In September 2015, 193 member states of the United Nations adopted a plan for achieving a better future, laying out a path over the next 15 years to end extreme poverty, fight inequality and injustice, and to protect the planet. So at the heart of this Agenda 2030 are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Within the 17 goals, there are 169 targets. There's just a picture of the different SDGs, each one numbered, the first one being poverty, and of course, the last one being partnerships for the goals. Where did we come from? If you look at the MDGs, the year 2000, the Millennium Development Goals were devised, only 8 goals with 21 targets. However, in 2015, it was realized that that wasn't working well, and we're not only dealing with developing countries, we needed to include all countries. So that's when the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, were devised. 17 goals with 169 targets. The MDGs then in 2000 were brought about to reduce poverty, extend basic services in poor countries. However, as I said before, we needed to include all countries. And that's when the SDGs came about to bring about a sustainable development in all countries. There are, however, different ways of looking at these sustainable development goals, or lenses as we call it nowadays, you know, a different way of looking at things. So some people look at the SDGs and say, look, they're basically 6 elements of the SDGs, which include dignity, people, planet, partnerships, prosperity, peace and justice. Whereas others look at only 3 elements of the SDGs, which include people, prosperity, and planet. And if you look at the planet, SDG 13, 14, and 15 is included there, which talks about climate action, life below water, and life on land. Others will look at the SDGs and say, it is about the 5 P's: planet, people, prosperity, partnership, and peace. If we look at planet, to protect our planet's natural resources and climate for future generations. Peace, to foster peaceful, just and inclusive societies. Then others will look at it under 3 pillars. The first pillar, an economic pillar, that speaks about the no poverty, zero hunger, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. On the other hand, an environmental pillar, which includes climate action, clean water and sanitation, life on land, life below the water. And the third pillar is the social pillar, which includes education, equality, peace and justice. So it really depends on where you are at and how you're going to look at the SDGs and how you can bring about, how we can bring about change in our environment or in the area in which we work. Well, number 17, goal number 17 speaks of partnerships for goals. Why is this goal important? Because it talks about strengthening the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. This one is important because without partnerships, it's almost impossible to ensure that the goals are going to be met, sustainable, and also being able to reach. The reason for including the 17th goal, because each and every one, we need to depend and work with different partners, different organizations, governments, civil society, NGOs, even our child and youth care centers, our child and youth care workers, and our children. Extremely important, because if we look at the first goal, which speaks about no poverty. Now, within each of the goals, I spoke of 169 targets. Now, each goal has some 7, 8, 9, or even 10 targets. So I'm just going to deal with 1 or 2 targets in 2 of these goals. So under no poverty, target number 1 speaks about eradicating extreme poverty. And that is where people are living below the breadline, where some people are not even surviving on the minimum. And we need to ensure that extreme poverty is eradicated by the year 2030. Target number 2 speaks of reduced poverty by at least 50%. Now, the difference between the two is eradicating extreme poverty, and where there is poverty, by reducing it at least by 50%. Now, some of you will say, oh, but that is government's responsibility. Yes, it is government's responsibility, but it also is my and your responsibility to assist in this action. However, last year, COVID-19 dealt us all a heavy blow. COVID-19 has led to the first rise in extreme poverty in a generation. Now, a generation is basically a couple of years. A generation is normally spoken of 40 years, can be reduced as like 10 years. This is the first time that extreme poverty has increased in such a short period of time. It's projected that an additional 119 to 124 million people were pushed back into extreme poverty in 2020. The global poverty rate is projected to be 7% in 2030. That is huge. And this obviously, we will be missing that target of eradicating poverty. Goal number 2 is zero hunger. We don't want to have people going hungry. So two of the targets here is target number 2 is to end all forms of malnutrition. Target number 3 is to double the productivity and incomes of small-scale food producers. So small business, encourage people to grow their own crops and feed the community, as opposed to depending on government to do that. However, again, COVID-19, this global pandemic is exacerbating world hunger. Worldwide, an additional 70 to 160 million people are likely to have experienced hunger as a result of the pandemic. The estimates, on the other hand, because at the moment, the pandemic will worsen child nutrition. At the moment, 22% of children under 5 are stunted. 6.7% of children under 5 suffer from wasting. And 5% of children under 5 are overweight. Now, these estimates do not even reflect the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. This is current figures. That is huge. And we don't want it to get worse. And we need to see what we can do, how we can help the situation of preventing world hunger. Childhood is a critical period for the development of human and social capital. We always say our children are the leaders of the future. They are the leaders of today. It is decisive in preparing societies to be prosperous, sustainable, and inclusive in the future. Our children are important. We need to look at ways and means of getting our kids to survive. The UN has realized that children are at the greatest risk of being left behind. Now, every child needs to live in a safe and clean environment. And here, some of the goals that is important is goal number 1, no poverty. Goal number 3, good health and well-being. Goal number 6, clean water and sanitation. Not all the goals are included in here, but many of the goals add to a child living in a clean and safe environment. Every child learns. Goal number 4 speaks about a quality education. Children need to be able to learn to read and write, to understand and to articulate themselves. Every child is protected from violence, exploitation, and harmful practices. It's our responsibility to protect our children, to ensure that gender-based violence doesn't happen. Goal number 5 talks about gender equality. Goal number 8 speaks of decent work and economic growth, and not using child labor, underage children to do work or go to work. Goal number 16 speaks of peace, justice, and strong institutions, so that kids are not open to harmful practices or exploitation. Every child lives in a safe and clean environment where there's no poverty, good health and well-being, clean water and sanitation. So there again, goal number 3, goal number 1, goal number 6 is included. Every child survives and thrives. Again, some of the other goals are not necessarily excluded, but I've just included goal number 2. It speaks of zero hunger. And goal number 3, good health and well-being. Now, many of these goals that have been devised by the United Nations encourages us, and here I'm speaking of you and I as child and youth care workers, as social services professionals, protecting, caring, and just ensuring our children thrive, that our children grow into adults that are going to also at some stage or other be able to add value to the environment in which they live, the communities in which they live, and of course, that our planet survives. We need to look at these goals in more detail, and I would encourage you to go to the United Nations website if you have not heard about the Sustainable Development Goals. Read up. There's a lot of material that you can look at and get information how you can get involved and how you can ensure that these Sustainable Development Goals can meet the required targets at the end of the day. It's up to you and I to be the difference, to make the difference, because if we're going to leave it up to our governments alone, our world is not going to survive. Each country is required to produce a report on an annual basis and send to the United Nations to say what developments have happened in each of the countries during that particular year. And we can make it happen. We can make it happen on the ground. We can make the difference. We can be the difference in the lives of many young children that come through our hands in our child and youth care centers or in our communities where we work. I want to applaud our child and youth care workers, our social workers, our social auxiliary workers, and any other social service professional who works in the life space of a child and ensuring that our children receive the services that they need, that they are required, and also that our kids don't go without being healed at the end of the day, especially children that have gone through such major trauma. So I want to thank each one of you for the part that you play in the lives of the young people that come through our hands. I want to thank you for being there, standing in the gap, being the champion, being the hero in many children's lives. One day, when they're older, they will say, it is because of that person, you and I, the difference that you and I made, or the time that we just stood by them or encouraged them to do a particular thing, that they say, that is because of that person. It's because of you that I am where I am today. So thank you very much for just being part of this conference and being sharing in this presentation today. And I just want to encourage you to do the best that you can in ensuring that our environment, our country, our world will sustain for our generations to come. Thank you very much, Francisco.
Mr. Cairns, what a presentation. Thank you very much. Thanks indeed. Such a rich information sharing, you know, and I'm sure, just like I am not always focused on reading these kind of things, which obviously plays into our daily lives. I am just once again reminded about these kind of important things. Not, I mean, not that I've never read it before. I have, but it's not that you place so much emphasis. But what I found interesting was the way you broke it down in simpler terms. The fact that you could use those slides that, even just the slide tells a story, which was great. And certainly something that we need to alert our people in our day-to-day lives, children especially, alert them to the reality of how we make contribution at the end of the day for the future. And then that is what sustainability isn't about. We all have a role to play in ensuring that we contribute.
We certainly do.
To ensure that sustainable goals is adhered to, those 5 Ps. And what you've highlighted are the actual response to children's needs on a day-to-day basis, isn't it? We do this, but we don't think that far. We don't put that kind of what do you call word or description attached to it. And that's the difference that I picked up here. We do it without realizing that we are responding to the Sustainable Development Goals. Your encouragement, where you say we as child and youth care workers need to be encouraged to protect, care, and add value to the big picture. Sustainable goals. We need to make the difference. We need to be the difference. We need to be the change, and we can make it happen. So thank you very much once again for this presentation. It's the right time. I think it's the right time. I think this whole thing about crisis as an opportunity is where this fits in. But what I want to ask is, I'm not seeing much any questions at the moment. What I want to ask is, how do we create a platform in children's homes to make this a little bit more easier for our children and our staff to grasp? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, Francisco, as far as I understand, we are already doing many of these things. If you look at the goal number 4 about education, we already, the kids go to school. When they come home from school, we as child and youth care workers and professionals, we will ensure that they are doing well at school, that we will have tutors that can assist them. We are already ensuring that the children that we're working with are not going to go hungry, that we're trying to develop them into better people. And sometimes you talk about able to add value to society at the end of the day. If we can just make a difference in one person's life, then it's all worthwhile. But we have so many kids coming through our hands, we are making a difference. But just one of those things that you can't save the whole world, you one person. But many of us, if we double up our efforts and treble, we can make a huge difference, a bigger difference in our world today.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, and I think it's almost encouraging in children's programs. One of those aspects, let's say reading. Okay, children have the right to education. Putting it out there. But then adding a further explanation and saying, do you know why? Because we have the right to education. We have a responsibility to learn. But what is the long-term goal of having to go to school? Isn't it?
Yes.
And then saying to
the thing is
this is one of the sustainability goals, or the development goals, the Millennium development goals as well. Because in 20-30 years time, whoever is still around, will have to set platforms for new babies who are born. And we've got to ensure that they have better education than what we had. So it's putting the emphasis on that.
Not only that, Francisco, to ensure that the environment, that the world is still around in a decent place, as in we haven't raped the land, we have not depleted the food supplies, that the water and the sea is not destroyed. We need to look at those things. We need to look at life on land, life below the water, in order to ensure that future generations are going to be able to have something at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you. No. I was just reading something the other day about they're looking to start life on Mars. And I'm saying the idea is to spend billions and billions of dollars on trying to put something on planet Mars or on the moon, as opposed to using that money and getting our world, Earth, improved.
Yes.
And we can do it.
Yeah.
Why waste money going there? Because you'll only be able to have a few 100 or 1,000 people on that planet anyway.
Correct.
Whereas here, the millions of people survive.
Yes. And it's falling. It's when you fall over that piece of paper and forget to pick it up that impacts negatively.
Correct. Yes. So true.
Yeah. Graeme, there's a couple of people who are saying hi and thank you very much for this presentation. Definitely an eye opener. So I think we've got a platform. I think we've got something we can work into our day-to-day programs in children's homes. And once again, thanks for alerting us to this. It's breaking down those big words into sizable, chewable bites so that we can digest properly and make this part of our day-to-day living. So once again, thank you for your time. Thank you for putting out a presentation there. It's being recorded. It will definitely be logged, and it will be available for people to follow as well. Graeme, all the best. Thanks very much, and keep safe. Thank you, everybody who was sitting in and listening. We really appreciate you. All the best. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Thanks, Francisco, and thank you, everybody. Thank you, NACCW, for the opportunity.
Thank you. So I'm ending the session.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye now.